Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial. Today I'm going to show you something different. I'm going to show you how to create procedural jellyfish. Wow. Yeah, it's a lot of fun to make. It's all done in geometry nodes and you can just customize it all you want, animate it all you want. I love this. Right, so it's a little bit different than the previous tutorials about hairs. Hairs is very important for a lot of renders, but sometimes you gotta mix it up a little bit and add some creature stuff in there as well. So that's why I'm gonna focus on jellyfish in this tutorial, because it is a lot of fun. I also added the Blender file on my Gumroad page. The link is in the description. I did add it for a small price this time because there is a lot of work going into these tutorials. So you can choose to either follow the tutorial and create it yourself, or you can pick it up for a small price. Depends on what you prefer. So you see the image that we're going to be creating. Well, it's not going to be the exact same image. I'm going to be focusing on kind of like a phone wallpaper resolution image with the same jellyfish. Right, so that's what we're going to be working on. So let's dive into Blender. We're going to start off by deleting this guy and adding a new sphere, because that's the easiest way to create, in my opinion, a jellyfish. And I'm going to edit mode. I'm setting my proportional editing, and I'm just going to move this up so we have pretty much an inside and an outside shape of our jellyfish. Make sure to select the center, move that up like that. Beautiful. This is going to be the shape of a jellyfish. I'm just going to scale this up a little bit and exclude the z-axis, just like that. Beautiful, beautiful. And there we go. This is going to be our basic shape. I'm going to now add a weight paint right away, because I want a weight painting map that defines where the tentacles will be. Right, so that's only going to be this inside part. So I'm just going to go to weight paint, and I'm going to go to my object properties, add a vertex group, and call this tentacles. And this, I'm just gonna paint the inside here with a weight map. Right, there we go. We can tweak this later. Don't worry if you're not satisfied right away. There we go. Beautiful. Something like this. We may have to exclude some parts on the top there, actually. We'll do that later. Alright, so we have a foundation. Shade that smooth. Add a new window, and let's dive into geometry nodes that easily. Beautiful. Add a new system. And right away we're gonna add a join geometry, because we want to keep this shape no matter what we do. And then we're gonna add a distribute points on faces, because I want those tentacles to be distributed on that weight map. So we need a starting point for the curves that will be those tentacles. So I'm gonna connect that as well, connect the geometry there as well, and then we get some random points. And now how do we add that weight map in our geometry nodes? Well, it's quite easy actually. Go to the modifier tab, and this is where we can add it. So we are going to swipe this empty point there, which is an input, into the density right there. And then we have a default value, but we want this to be an attribute, the weight paint map. So we're going to click this little attribute toggle button. We're going to click here, and we're just going to select our tentacle map. There we go. Now we only have 3 points because the weight paint values are ranged between 0 and 1. And a density of 1 is incredibly low, so we want to add a math node in between and just set that to multiply, and then set this value to something that you like, something like this, and that works already quite nicely. Right, so this will pretty much be our density value that we can control, and we can already swipe that in there, for example, to get a new input, and we can name that tentacle density. Beautiful. Right, and that will be it. I'm not going to call this one density, actually. I'm going to call this the weight map, which is not something we are going to be using. Right, something like this. Now, if you want to tweak the weight paint, there is going to be some issues. Well, at least one. Because if I set this weight to 0, if I want to exclude some parts, for example there, well, it is going to work now for some reason. But I have had it a few times where it doesn't work, and that is because you're drawing weight paints, right? So if it doesn't work for you, if you have your weight set to 0 and you draw and there is no updates in your geometry nodes, no particles are deleted, you can just set the brush from draw to subtract, and then just set this to 1 and subtract your weight the same way. All right. So that is just in case it doesn't work. It has been the case for me before, where for some reason I couldn't get my my brush to work with draw and setting the weight to 0. It wouldn't remove the geometry for me. So if it doesn't work, remember that. All right, but it does now, so that is perfect. Something like this will be fine. So we're going to be using these points as the starting points of our curve objects that will be the tentacles, right? So how do we do that? Well, we need to instance something on those points, right? So we're going to look for an instance on points, distribute instances on points. What is it called? Instances on points there. Swipe that there. And for the instance, we want to add, let's see, a line. Mesh line? Nope. Curve line. There we go. And these will instantly go up. Alright, so we have to change that. We have to change that starting point. We are probably going to just set this endpoint to 0, because that's going to be the starting point. And then we're going to set the starting point to a minus value. Right, so the endpoint will now be at the top, and the start point will be at the bottom, just like that. We can also just, by the way, this may be easier, set this to 0 and then just set the endpoint to minus. Yeah, that's better. So later when we use endpoint selection for things, it will be much more natural to use. All right, so these will be our tentacles. Amazing. All right, so now how do we add some random noise there, or how do we control this? Well, it is quite easy, and I like to have things easy to control. So I always add, for example, an empty object there, empty plane axis. And I want this to be pretty much what controls where my curves are gonna be heading. So how do we do that? Well, that's easy. We're gonna select our geometry nodes, and we have to move the positions of those endpoints. So what we're gonna do is Shift A, and we're gonna search for set position, and we wanna do that after our points are instanced, right there. Okay, so what do we want to use to set the position? We want to use this empty. So what I'm going to do is just drag that empty in here. So we get the object info. And I'm now just going to set the location of this empty. And we have to set this on relative first. We want to set this location to the position of those curves. And they will now disappear pretty much, which is, it's not what we want, of course. And the reason why this happens is because we are now moving entire curves to the center of this point, which means we only see one curve there, because they're all in the same spot. Right, to fix this issue of having everything at the same spot, we first need to realize those instances. So they are all their own unique object, their own unique spline. So realize those instances there, and they will be gone. Don't worry. And right away, we're going to set the spline type, set spline type to Bezier, and set the handle type, to auto. So it will all look very smooth in the end. There we go. So now how do we move only the endpoints of those curves? So we can add an endpoint selection, for example, and swipe that into the selection and set the start size to 0. There we go. Now only the endpoint of this curve is gonna be moving towards that empty. So we can now move this around, for example, and everything will move with it. Beautiful. Right, so we still have the issue of things not actually being a curve. Right, we have 2 points, it seems like, and that's not what we want. So we can resample a curve, to add more points. So now we have 10 points, for example, and now we can control from which points the curve will start heading towards that empty. So we can swipe this up, for example. You can see that it will affect the amount of points that will move towards that empty. And we can even reduce this point so everything is going to be a little bit smoother. something like this. So how do we stop this from all going to the same point? All right, so to do this, we need some kind of random value to offset those points a little bit. All right, so we can do that quite easily with a vector map, because we want this empty location to be offset. Right, so how do we do that? Well, we're just gonna swipe this vector into a random value. Beautiful. So now they're all gonna be offset at some random location, and we can tweak those values to be minus as well and positive as well. Right, so just tweak those values. We can always just add a value there, so we can control it with one click and a value there as well. And then, for example, actually, let's have a value of -1 and set that to the max as well, and then add a math of a multiply with -1. So they are the opposites. We can also set this to 1, doesn't matter. All right, so now they're all going to be a little bit random there, and we can control that with one value. So how much that offset will be. And that is very nice. So how do we tweak this chaos a little bit? Well, what I'm going to do is actually delete those values, because I don't think we need that much variation on the z-axis. So I'm going to delete those nodes, and I'm just going to customize this after I set this end size to 1. So that's already looking better. And we can add some noise later to the rest of the tentacles. That may be better. And I'm just going to decrease the Z value a little bit like that, and those values a little bit as well. And let's say we want these to be a little bit less as well. So let's keep that the same as a minus of 0.5 or something like that. There we go. And let's set the Z value to like -1. And how about 1? That's looking nice. So this already adds a little bit of variation on that bottom part, but not nearly enough. All right, so you can also see that if we change this value, that we have a lot of changes in the way this is going to move to the empty as well. All right, so if I tweak this down, you can see that we can actually get away with a lower value. That looks much better. Amazing. So now if you move this, you can see that it curves incredibly well with that empty, and it doesn't move completely to that empty. Amazing. Right, but now we want to add some noise, and we don't have enough splines to add a lot of noise. So what we can do is, after this set position, we still have a spline. So we can now, after that, just add some more noise. So we add a set position node there, and we want this offset to be a noise texture. There we go. And right away we can see that our entire curves moves, and that is because we have an offset in this noise texture. So we have to add a vector math in between. Set this to subtract, I guess, and let's set this to -0.5. Nope, subtract 0.5, my bad. And then it will be moving back to the center, and we can actually set this noise texture. Right, we don't have enough points yet. So remember, we only have 3 points in our curve. So I'm gonna resample my curve now, and we can have a set amount of whatever, actually. So I'm gonna start buff by 9, and we can see that if we resample this curve, we also have no longer got our spline in place. So what I'm gonna do is just add a set spline type, Bezier, and a set handle type in between, and we get this nice curvy look back, and we can now change those settings. I'm gonna set the detail to 0 and just work with the scale. So we can scale this all the way down, and we have some larger movements like so. I like the way that looks. And we can set this to 4D to actually control this later on. You can see how amazing this looks. We can even animate that later. I like that a lot. And then for the strength, we can just add a math node, or let's say vector math, in between, and set that to multiply. And let's just set, well, we want this to be the same for each axis. I'm just going to add a value node. And I'm going to swipe this up a little bit until we have something that looks nice. So I want some large variations first. So I'm going to select the scale and set this lower. And we can set the strength a little bit higher. All right. Positive or minus doesn't really matter. And I'm actually going to set this to scale, I think. and then just control that. That may be nicer. Something like this. And we may need a little bit of a larger value. Or smaller, actually. Let's see. I'm just gonna play around with this a little bit. Like that. Yeah, it is looking better, I think. And then just change the strength to be a little bit less. Like this. Awesome. Right, so now we have a small issue, right? And you see it if I increase the scale, that those starting points are no longer connected to my jellyfish. And that is annoying, right? Because those tentacles have to be attached. How do we take care of that? Well, we can do it now, and I will. All right, the best things to do is in the end when we have everything set in place. So actually, I'm gonna save that for a little bit later. I first want some more noise in those endpoints of my tentacles. I want them to move out a little bit more. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is add another set position node right there, and I'm gonna add another offset with a noise texture. There we go, and we have to duplicate those two nodes and connect that in between, because we need to set that subtract value so it doesn't all move to the top right. So I'm gonna connect this to the vector, and I'm gonna add the scale to the offset. There we go. And I only want this to be controlled with the endpoints of my curves. So I'm gonna set, let's see, I'm going to add an endpoint selection once again. Set the start size to 0 and the end size to about 6 or 5. We have 9 points, so this will work. Selection to selection. So I only want this to affect the endpoints of my curve. So I can move this to, let's say, 3. So it only selects the last 3 points of my curve. And I want this to move out, right? So I can just move this up a little bit. And you can see that it's now gonna be moving a little bit outwards. And we can even set this to 1 perhaps, like so. So we only move those endpoints out. That may actually work better. Let's see, do we like that? I want this to be controlled by the length actually. So not really the endpoint, but I want the offset to be defined by the length of my jellyfish. I'm gonna add a spline parameter. Or spline length perhaps. Let's see, the length, no, we need a parameter. So spline parameter. And we can use the vector or the length to control the strength of this, this noise. So if I move this all the way up, you can see that it moves outwards quite alright. We can change the scale a little lower actually. Like this. So remove that detail and the roughness as well. And then just scale this up a little bit. Or down, let's see what works better. And we only want this to affect those endpoints. Alright. So, how do we take care of that? Right, so let's tweak those values a little bit so it looks better. And we only want this endpoint, of course, to be selected. So I'm gonna add a new vector math, I guess, and multiply this with the length. So at the starting points, it will be 0 because the length at that point is 0. And the farther it moves down, the stronger this noise texture will be. It's as easy as that. So we can improve the scale. You can see those endpoints will move farther as well. Now this scale of the noise texture may be a little bit too small, so I'm going to add that a little bit. And we can even tweak that in our animation later, which is amazing. Scale a little bit higher maybe. There we go. And let's say if the vector does a better job. Nah. Length is fine. Beautiful. So we can tweak the W to get the value that we like better. Something like this perhaps. And we can keep that fixed throughout the animation. Or we can just increase that later on. Alright, so if you want some more randomness in those tentacles, we can just tweak it. And now we can just move this, and those values will change with it as well, which is very organic and beautiful, right? Amazing. Alright, so what else do we need? Well, I already like the way this looks, but if we change this to be very large, for example, this one, you can see that the starting points of our curves are going to move out of our jellyfish. And we don't want that, so we're gonna add another set position. And now we want to drag the actual original sphere in there. So we want it to be this geometry that affects the location of those starting points. So we're gonna swipe that to the right, and we're gonna add a proximity. And move that to the right a little bit, so it is near the set position. And we want to use the proximity of this, so the position of the closest faces, to control the offset of those curves. There we go. That's not looking what we need right away, but it will be. So what we're gonna do is set this into the position instead, and we're gonna add another endpoint selection. Set the endpoint to 0 and the start size to like 2 perhaps. And we're gonna move this selection into the selection of the set position. There we go. So now the starting points of our jellyfish will be connected to our actual geometry. So if I move this around, you can see it will all stay connected beautifully, and you can create some amazing animations with it as well. Look at that beautiful stuff right there. And you can see that the longer those curves get, the more they're also gonna be affected by the noise texture. Amazing. So you can create some very long jellyfish. You can even animate it to move it around and stuff like that. Beautiful. All right, so how do we now control this into getting an actual curve that has thickness? Well, that's not that hard. We're gonna add, let's see, what do we need first? We need a curve radius. Set curve radius there, so we can control the radius of the curve. Actually, we need that to be on the curve only, so curve radius before the joint geometry. Otherwise, we don't have an actual curve. And we also want to set or transform the curve to a mesh, so curve to mesh. Swap that in between there, and the profile curve is going to be a curved circle. Amazing. Right, so now we have some thickness, but how do we control the radius? Well, it's either with this one or with the curved circle right now. So we can set this radius to a spline parameter. There we go. And we can now add, let's say, a map range in there. And this is actually a spline parameter is a float. And we can now change those values a little bit. So the endpoints, I want this to be 0. And the start points, I want this to be a little bit thicker. Like that, for example. Beautiful. Right, so there's still the issue of stuff clipping through a little bit. And we can tweak that quite easily, because we have some noise textures that are gonna affect the entire curve. So we can select this endpoint selection and just make sure that all of our noise textures don't affect the starting points of our curves. Something like this. And for this one as well, so just duplicate this and swap that into the second one as well. There we go. So now it only affects the base points. We may actually have to limit the movement of the starting points to the jellyfish to only the first one. So let's select the start files to be 1 only. There we go. So now they move straight down perfectly, and we could actually limit this a little bit higher to 7 perhaps, or maybe even 8. No. So the first one is going to be 7, and the second set position is going to be a little bit higher. Beautiful. Something like this is already looking great. So we can move this around and control the jellyfish, and it will also control that noise of the tentacles a little bit. Right, so it may be a little bit strong, so the length will affect. So if I disconnect this and move this around, it's going to be a little bit smoother. And that's because the length will affect that noise texture a little bit. So if we move this around, you may think that the movement that is changing is a little bit too strong. And that is because the length changes of those tentacles, which will also change the strength of the noise texture and stuff like that. Alright, so that is something that you may have to tweak a little bit. We can add a vector map Set this to multiply, and just set this to a value, and just increase this a little bit. So now when we move this around, it won't be as strong, but it will still be very beautiful and elegant, right? So I love the way this looks already. We can move this to the side a little bit, make this longer. I love it. I love it. I love it. All right, so let's get into some other settings. And I know I'm going on for a little bit already, but I want some additional curves, okay? Just some more thickness. And there's an easy way to do this. If we want some other curves that are smaller, for example, we can, for example, watch this. We can have the same distribute points on faces. And actually, we want everything to be pretty much the same. Yeah, we want everything pretty much to be the same. So what we can do is we can just swipe this there, and we can add, wait, we need this one. And we're gonna swipe this into a trim curve. And we want this to trim by a vector, and we can now add this there. And we can make those curves a little bit smaller, for example. You can see that they now stop sooner, right there. And what we want to do is offset the noise and the starting points as well. So what we're going to do is set position. And we want some random offset at the start points and a noise texture. And we have to, of course, add a vector math in between, set to subtract at 0.5. And there we go. We already have some offset now in a noise. There we go. And now if we connect this with a set curve radius and a curve to mesh right there, and we can use the same profile for that one. And now we can just tweak this curve radius, set curve radius. We can actually use the same map range with a little bit of a math node in between to multiply. And we can now just add a little bit of a smaller value, for example, like so. And we could do that as much as we want, so as often as we want as well. So we can now just use this. If we press Ctrl-Shift-D on all of those nodes, it will all be connected with the same values, at least as often, as much as is possible. And then we can just add this one at the joint geometry, and we could tweak some of that offset of the noise, and this will now be a different curve pretty much, right? So that's how you can just create some variation. We could trim this up a little bit differently, so it's longer or less long, like so. And it is all still going to be dependent on our empty, which is amazing if you ask me. Right, so we have shorter tentacles that will move a little bit faster, and the long ones will be nice and elegant. So you can move this around slowly, animate it, just like that. Wow, beautiful. Right, so there's one more thing that I want to do. And that is, if I select my jellyfish, it is very round. It just is. Right, so we have one line starting from all the way of our group input, going all the way to the end to our joint geometry. And we want to add some kind of displacement variation there. So I'm going to do set position, and that's a node we use a lot here. And I'm going to add a noise texture, all right? Like that. And we need the subtract node, of course, to set that to 0. And I'm going to swipe that in and connect that to the offset. And we may need some extra geometry, so I'm going to add a subdivide mesh right in front of the set position. And now we can just tweak those values a little bit, and the scale of the noise texture as well. I'm going to set the detail to 0, roughness to 0, and change the scale a little bit so it is not as strong, something like that perhaps. And it is still too strong, so add a vector math, set to multiply, and just tweak those values with one thing, a value node. There we go. And we can now add some variation in that noise. And we want to set to 4D, so we can now animate the movement of the jellyfish. Amazing. right? So now the inside is going to move as well, like that. And that is just nice, because we have movement in our jellyfish, and the geometry proximity is actually coming from our base mesh still. What I want is, if we move this, I want those starting points to move with that noise texture as well, so we can actually animate it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is, instead of connecting the geometry proximity to that original mesh, I'm going to set the set position into that proximity, right? So now if I change this W, it will change those starting points of those nodes as well, which is amazing, right? So now we can tweak this. We can even just film this from the bottom side, animate this from the bottom side, and our starting points will move with the mesh. So that's beautiful. Nice. So now it's completely animated. We can render this out if we want. I'm going to make a nice frame. Set my render to a square. Actually, I'm going to move this up and this down a little bit. So we've got like a phone wallpaper shape, something like that. Move this out a little bit, like so. And I want those tentacles to be a little bit longer and perhaps a little bit seen from below as well, like so. And just gonna move this down then, right? So that's why we made it procedural. We can just control the shape of our tentacles beautifully. Something like this. Wow, that's a nice frame. That's a nice frame. Like this. Let's go to rendered view. I set this to cycles already. No, I did not. Cycles, GPU. There we go, looking beautiful. And I'm going to change this to an environment texture HDRI. And you can download an HDRI map from Polyhaven. So I'm going to search for HDR. And I'm just going to set this to some kind of... I like Klutzleby lately. Klutzleby. I love that lighting a lot. Delete this. I'm going to set the film to transparent. There we go. And I'm going to set the strength a little bit lower as well, of this world texture. It's a little bit too strong in my for my liking, so just swipe this down. It is underwater, of course. And to make it look like it's underwater, I'm just going to add a cube, scale this up, add a new material. Where is my new button? New. And add a new volume. Swipe that in. Set that to like 0.1. I'm gonna swipe up the anisotropy like that. And we can now add a little bit of a backlighting or a top lighting actually. So add a spotlight. So this will be like the sun shining through our water. And make sure that it points at our jellyfish. Like this. And let's increase that strength a little bit. Like so. Actually maybe a lot more, right? Like that. And it's gonna be blue, yeah, a little bit bluish. And we want this volume to be a little bit blue as well, because that's gonna be the water. Right, something like this. And we can set the spot size to be a little bit smaller. Like so. A little bigger, actually. We want this to light the entire squid from a little bit from the side, I guess. And we can just increase that strength depending on how we like it. Alright? Something like this is looking beautiful. Now, some quick materials. I'm gonna select my sphere. So my squid head is going to get one material and my tentacles are going to get another material. Something like this. And I'm going to go add a new material. And for this, I want some transparent values as well. So I'm gonna do a mixed shader. There we go. And a transparent node with it as well. Connected to the second one. And we can already see that it's getting a little bit transparent. And to control where it is transparent, I'm gonna add a Fresnel node to the vector. And I'm gonna Ctrl-Shift-click on that Fresnel and see how it looks. That looks actually quite nice already. And I'm gonna connect that once again. And let's see, maybe we have to switch these up. That's fine, that's fine, that's fine. And let's add a color ramp. Because I want this, and I don't want it to be completely transparent. So I'm going to change this black value. And move that up a little bit, so it is not completely transparent. Something like that, perhaps. Beautiful. And we can even move these a little bit closer together. So let's see. We may now have it too close. Switch them up. Yeah, that's looking better. And I'm gonna add a little bit of color to my transparency. Maybe a little bit of pink. Pink value. And I'm gonna do the same for this one. Maybe a little bit aqua. Nah, let's do a little bit pink as well. Like so. And I'm gonna add, let's see, would we like a little bit of subsurface? I guess we do. Swipe that up a little bit. I think it is too pinkish. So I'm gonna swipe that up a little bit, like so. That's already looking nicer. So like this, you can create incredibly nice jellyfish, and you have to do this once, and then you can just reuse this whenever. So you can duplicate your entire jellyfish like that, and you can tweak it to have more in your scene like that. Move it in the back, duplicate it, and of course remember to move those empties as well. I mean, they are all controlled by the same empty now. Each jellyfish will move to the same empty, which is fine. But you can also link them to a new empty. If I duplicate this, for example, and duplicate the empty too, we can select that jellyfish, go to the geonodes, and instead of doing the empty to the regular empty, we're gonna do this to the second empty. There we go. So now we can control that separately, and that's just nice, right? That's just something nice. So I'm gonna move this back a little bit, maybe create a little bit of depth in the scene, like so. I may even add a little bit of light behind our friends, maybe a point light or a spotlight actually, and rotate that to make it point at our jellyfish, like so. And I'm just gonna increase the radius and then the strength, right? Amazing. Wow, that's looking beautiful. A nice looking render, right? So this is one way to create some incredibly quick jellyfish. And I may actually move this to the left a little bit, and I'm just gonna delete. We have 4 somewhere. Where's the 4th one? I'm losing my jellyfish. Oh, there it is. So I'm gonna move this there a little bit, this there a little bit, so they don't all interact that quickly. And I'm gonna move this up a little bit, and let's see how that changes the scene. And I'm moving the wrong empty, and actually by selecting the second empty in that geometry node editor, I made them all move to that empty. So I'm gonna move this back to empty regular. There we go. And we have to duplicate the geometry nodes for our 4th friend, so it doesn't all change for the same geometry nodes. So we now have 2 geometry nodes, one for this one and the other one for the other 3 jellyfish. And now we can change that empty. Alright, so if we have this selected for our second jellyfish, make sure to just move it around a little bit so those changes are actually implemented as well. So that's looking nice. I'm gonna add another empty for the squid in the back, because I don't like that they are all moving to the same spot. So I want this to move out left a little bit. So I'm gonna connect this geosystem, add a new one, so duplicate it, to the second empty, move it around so it gets those changes. And I want one more for this one. So I'm gonna duplicate that and move that a little bit to the right so our tentacles don't all intersect. Add a new one for that, and select the 3rd empty, move it around, and they are all now nicely connected. Beautiful. Let's go to the render. That's looking great. I love it. You can create a jellyfish scene like this very easily. Very easy. And you can even add some more lighting. Lighting is key in things like this. So we can, for example, set this to pink and just increase the strength a little bit, so there's actually some kind of light shining through our jellyfish. Duplicate that and move it to our other jellyfish as well, for example, or change the color to be a little bit more aquatic. Things like this is just so much fun to play around with. All right, so I'm going to actually go to this shader editor of my jellyfish, and I think it's too transparent. So I'm just going to do mix shader for the transparent, add a principled BSDF right there, and let's set the vector to be almost the transparent one, but not quite. Like that. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Right, so I'm just gonna leave it at that, I guess. And we may actually have to switch these two up. Or switch these two up, sorry. Yeah, that's looking better. So we don't actually see our tentacles connect that hard. And it may still be too transparent. I don't know why. It just looks too transparent for me. So something like that, maybe. Let's see if we just connect our pin spot. Nah. Alright, so something like this is, in my opinion, a bit better. Right? So not completely transparent. And you can keep tweaking this, by the way. So we can add a little bit of transparency. And you can always add a separate material for your for those little legs, those little jelly legs, if you would like. What I'm gonna do is select my point right there and just increase the radius a little bit. Like that. That's looking nice. Alright, now I think this is fine. I'm gonna render this out and then I'll be back. Right, so the render is done. I did do some post-processing on it with colors, vibrance, saturation, stuff like that, to make it just look a little bit more crisp. But this is what we ended up with, and you can see that you can create some quite nice looking jellyfish with this way. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helped in some way with the geometry nodes. I know we left it off quite chaotic, but I really don't want to get into the organizing and structuring in these tutorials, because that's just gonna take a lot of time, and I think you can all structurize your own geometry node setups. Alright, so I hope this helps with either setting up scenes, lighting, geometry nodes, whatever. I hope you had fun, and I hope you have a great weekend as well. And thank you so much for watching. If you did like the video, please do leave a like or comment or subscribe. Either of those will help me out a lot. And I'll see you in the next one.